Are you a business looking for a fresh new way to reach potential customers? Well, you need to get airtime on IT TV, a 24/7 streaming and on-demand TV service online and on Roku. With Roku having a potential reach of 62 million people, it's a perfect opportunity to reach potential customers through affordable commercial and infomercial spots. Visit us online today at itnetwork.tv.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Roundtable Talk Show. I am your host, Sharifah Hardie, and we are going to have a lot of fun today. If you missed yesterday's show, you definitely want to check it out because it got a little crazy there. A lot of fun. So we're going to look forward to today's show and see what happens. So I'm going to ask you to do what I always ask you to do, and that is to go ahead and share this show because friends don't let friends miss out on the Roundtable Talk Show. So while you're going ahead and sharing the show, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our very first guest, Mr. Eric Kim. Eric is a partner and program director at LA Tutors, a private tutoring company based in Los Angeles, specializing in K through 12 academics and test prep. He has over 20 years of experience in education and have helped thousands of families achieve their academic goals. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Good morning. It's nice to be here. How are you doing?
I'm excited.
Yeah. I'd love to participate. Like you said, I'm a partner at LA Tutors. We're a private tutoring company based out of Los Angeles, but we have clients worldwide, specializing in K through 12 education. So right now is actually our test prep season. A lot of students applying to colleges and private schools around the world. So this is one of our busiest times of year. But there's actually a lot of transition going on at the moment with SATs and ACTs becoming optional, as well as a lot of admissions tests becoming optionals for schools. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. But I'm happy to join in the conversation and talk to everybody here.
We're excited to learn more about you. We'll come back to you, Eric, but I want to go ahead and introduce our next guest who's looking for something. Angela, how are you? You're like in the same market as Eric, but I want to introduce our next guest, Miss Angela Karanja. Angela is an adolescent psychologist and parenting teenagers expert and the founder of Raising Remarkable Teenagers, helping parents of teenagers develop leadership skills to successfully influence their teenagers to be highly effective teenagers. Good morning, Angela. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm excited to be here. I love the energy and I'm loving everyone that's watching. Yes, as you said, I'm an adolescent psychologist and a parenting teenagers expert. More importantly is I love it when parents learn the strategies, psychological strategies to be able to influence their young people deeply, right? So you as a parent, I want you to introduce you to yourself as a leader. And because you're a leader, I want you to learn those psychological strategies for deeply influencing your young person so they actually listen to you and they respect you and you are honored. So that's what I do.
We're going to learn. I love your energy as well. We're going to learn more about you, but we're going to come back. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next guest. Our next guest is Miss Maya Ford. FordMomentum is the catalyst to solving communications issues that elevate and connect gaps within the human condition. Her goal is to help organizations and the people they serve to develop trusting relationships based on proven outcomes, not on assumptions. Good morning, Maya. How are you?
Hey, everybody. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Sharifah. I'm really happy to meet you all and your guests. FordMomentum is a communications firm. We really focus on cultural inclusion. We believe that conversations in the United States about race are mostly wrong. And we challenge that by helping people to recognize that they are their own assets. And so we're bored with these separatist notions. We want a new future that articulates a different way to be able to kind of own yourself We're tired of working for consumption and production alone, and we want more holistic lives. Our methodology, the standard of love, helps us to get there. So I think that it's deeply in tune with what your other guests have. It's an international issue, but each human on its own, we're divine and we're born with everything we need. We do that scientifically and connect that to socio-emotional components. So where you are, we are. We're really excited to meet you.
We are excited to meet you. Now we will come back to you. We want to go ahead and introduce our next guest, the lovely Miss Daniela Levy. Daniela is an author of Disengagement, which was just covered in the New York Times. Her prose and poetry in English, Hebrew, and Spanish have been published in numerous literary magazines, anthologies, and online platforms. And she has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize for her short fiction. Good morning, Daniela. How are you?
I'm good. It's actually evening where I am, coming to you from Israel. And I'm very happy to be here. I should start by saying that as a writer, I am much better at writing and listening than speaking. So being on a talk show is a little intimidating for me, but I'm really fascinated to hear your other guests. I think that the book that I've come to discuss, Disengagement, ties into what they've said so far because it covers an event in Israeli history that a lot of people haven't really heard about, but it's sort of a microcosm of a lack of communication and a sort of catalyst for fixing communication problems that happened in 2005 that I think most people didn't really draw the appropriate lessons from. And I think that it can also speak to the political reality in the United States as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, don't be intimidated. We're all family here. It's all good. I am going to come back to you. I want to go ahead and introduce our next guest, Mr. Robert Kimball. Robert wrote a book about his direct involvement in the creation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act in Congress. He dealt with key leaders of business and government, including Robert F. Kennedy, Roy Wilkins, NAACP, and Jimmy Hoffa, as well as many U.S. representatives, senators, cabinet members, and the media. He was working in the House of Representatives during the Birmingham church bombing and JFK's assassination. Wow, I'm impressed. Wow. You just shocked me. Good morning, Robert. How are you?
Good morning, dear. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm delighted to meet everybody.
We are delighted to meet you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what are you passionate about?
Well, I was incredibly lucky that when I was 24 years old, I got the opportunity to participate in the civil rights fight.
Wow.
And I worked for Congressman Lindsay at that time. And then I ran a little organization called the Republican Legislative Research Association. And we were privileged to be part of the discussions that led to the 64 Act.
Wow. We have more questions for you, Robert, but I'm just going to start the conversation. I want to go over to Maya. Maya, meeting someone like Mr. Robert Kimball, what are some of your thoughts?
Oh man, I have so many. You know, when we talk about these conversations of how Blacks and Hispanics, Indigenous persons in the US have driven social activism, their rights in the United States, we cannot deny that it's still based on a white is right framework. And, you know, I don't argue with history to say this is the terms and the resources and tools that we had at the time. But how does that change today? I'm the first person in my family born to immigrant parents who was born in the United States with full rights as an American citizen. And I look at that today and I still recognize at 45 years old that, like, yo, this stuff isn't accurate at all. And so, Robert, what's this next wave that you're seeing amongst Gen Xers, millennials, and the generations thereafter?
I think we can all learn from each other's experiences, and I'm hopeful that things will improve as we go along, and I'm delighted to be part of this book.
Absolutely. Daniela, when you hear Robert and Maya speak, what are your thoughts?
Well, it makes me think about how different politics are in the United States from here in Israel. There's a lot that's similar, and there are a lot of issues that we deal with that are parallel, and a lot that are not because of the unique history of Israel. So it's just interesting to hear. It's a lot of this political discussion is something that I watch kind of on the sidelines to see kind of what people are talking about. I feel it's very important to listen and to hear people's experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Angela, do you feel that these experiences are part of the growth and the lessons that we teach our young people?
Absolutely. And there is something that's very interesting. As he spoke, I was thinking of how far we have come, yet how not far we have come, right? And I'm thinking in terms of the converging, when we do research, what we are discovering is there's youths from all over the world. I'm here currently in Oxfordshire in the UK. But what we observe over and over again is there is a converging youth culture or a converging teen culture. And obviously, due to the internet and the mobilization of information, what your kid is thinking in Texas, my kid is thinking about the same thing. Why? Because they are watching the same things, they are talking the same language, they are, and that's why, for example, I just want to give an example of what happened when there was the unfortunate killing of George Floyd. I saw, do you know, I work with young people, and I saw young people from all cultures. They were actually calling me, asking me if I was okay. My white kids, my white parents, they're asking me if I'm okay. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of things have changed, yet a lot of things have not changed. But especially for teenagers, they're having a converging culture. They're thinking alike. They are doing the same thing, good or bad, unfortunately, good or bad, but they are thinking in like manner. So when you talked about that, I thought, do parents know that times have changed, and do they know what their kids are thinking? Because if you're trying to, gone are the days when I could tell my little girl, well, my teenage girl, oh, don't speak to that person, right? Those days are gone, because now they have access to Insta or whatever, and they can speak to whoever they like anywhere in the world. So that really struck a chord with me, and that's what came to mind when you talked about that.
Absolutely. Eric, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think everybody brings up a great point. I think the common theme here is that we're living in a different age of information technology where people are able to communicate and movements are born much more quickly. I think that through every industry, through every business, through a lot of, everywhere we see, we're noticing that um, change is happening a lot more quickly. It's being pushed a lot more thoroughly, and people are congregating around certain ideas and being more polarized. I think politically, you can find that in all areas and aspects. In education, one of the things we're seeing now is a push for more equity across all lines, right? And that's one of the reasons why most schools are now going test optional with SATs and ACTs, and private schools are going test optional with their admissions exams, because ultimately, in some sense, businesses like mine are a victim of our own success in that we help those with more resources actually achieve what they're able to improvement on these tests that other families without as many resources are maybe not able to do. We try to balance that by donating our time and effort and reaching out to other organizations to help underprivileged communities. But ultimately, it's a balance trying to strike between providing a service and also helping community at large. But I absolutely agree. It's definitely a tough a tough time we're in, where there's a lot of forces being pulled in every direction, and I think those forces and voices are amplified, especially today, now that um, communication and social media exist where we can all gather together in much larger numbers.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Eric, what is test optional?
So SATs and ACTs, I'm sure everybody knows about it back in the day, right? When we all took it to go to school, but test optional. Now schools, pretty much every university now is saying it's test optional, meaning if you'd like to submit scores, you can, but in their admissions policies, they are no longer considering or requiring it if you don't want to submit them. The idea, the push behind it is that those families without as much resources are at a disadvantage because for simple reasons of even paying the test fee for the SAT, they might not know about the waivers that are accessible to them. But more importantly, those without resources aren't able to prepare. And studies have shown that students, if they're not able to prepare us with whether it's tutoring or a class or something, are at a severe disadvantage to those who are able to. So what ends up happening is we see families, and these might be children who are equally, I would say, intelligent, equally capable, equally promising, with just as much potential, but one has the ability to attend a prep course and the other does not. You'll see a pretty significant difference in performance with these tests. So when you see that kind of disparity, coupled with the fact that SATs and ACTs have a marginal, but a just a very slight correlation to what colleges would consider success in their schools. We're finding that schools are now leaning towards letting the test be optional. On the other side of that, there's obviously a lot of pushback from these organizations which have been around for decades. College Board, who does the SAT, they do the AP exams, and the ACT as well. But the idea here is how do we fairly assess students without putting students at a disadvantage? And that's a question that I think is hard to answer no matter what.
I love this. I think it's such a huge break in the system in the sense that, oftentimes in the United States, what we're doing for education is pushing kids to learn something ultimately for production or consumption.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much more to who we are than production and consumption. And so this idea that learning has to be one way and we have to use it for a final outcome, I think is inaccurate. And it's part of the systemic issues that we continue to have in our communities. And so as minoritized persons who are now we call it the unempowered majority. As the unempowered majority comes out and we come with all of these lived experiences, those elements don't have places in standardized testing. We come with our culture, we come with language, multiple languages. Asian communities are a great example of this, as are Jewish communities who continue to teach their children in multiple languages and historical context. Yet there's no place for that in the standardized idea of production and consumption. And so we think that that's limited. Part of my methodology, the Standard of Love, is based on Bell Hook's work, who was she's a cultural anthropologist and sociologist, and she talks about self-esteem being the foundation of one's self-actualization. So in education, the question therein lies, what are we, how are we moving kids or our future to be more literate in not just text, but in cultural literacy, financial, economic, this idea of critical thinking? Where do we give space to that in our communities? And that then being something that's led into our values. And what I find as a communications and marketer, values are where it's at. It's where sustainability lives. It's where people are able to get character definition. Our reputations are built on our values. And that's, I think, the space.
Angela, I hear you.
Leverage those components as our assets for economic power. So absolutely. I think in the education system, I have questions as to garbage in, garbage out. What are we putting in?
Yeah, I think definitely our education system, at least in the US and in LA, has a lot of room for improvement. It's just such a large, slow-moving organization. I mean, I'm sure everybody's heard of the critical race theory argument or the debate that's going around the country right now. But beyond that, there's also a lot of what you said. There's a lot of skill sets that should be taught that aren't being taught. Yeah, I think a huge one that you mentioned that I think it strikes a chord with me is financial literacy. And I think that's a huge part of a skill set that everybody should be taught at a very early age that is not being taught, and that affects underserved communities, underprivileged youth at a much higher rate than it does those who are not. Because families who are doing well and have accountants and attorneys and parents who will teach their children these skills are always going to be one step up, as a step ahead of the youth that are not. So there are a lot of values, a lot of skills, and beyond just even something like those basic skills, life skills. I think what you mentioned, which is cultural awareness, will lead to less ignorance, will lead to more inclusion. But these things are not being taught. They're not being welcomed in schools, and for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of political reasons, but yeah, I think it's a good conversation to have. I think it's a conversation that always needs to be had, and there's always going to be some push-pull. But given the world's current dynamic, and I think it's not limited to the U.S., I think we're in a very interesting time in how things will move in the future.
Indeed. We say these are curious times.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get Robert's opinion on some of this. Given that you've been able to see, I think, some of the most important movements in our lifetimes and in our history, right? With the Civil Rights Act and everything. I mean, what do you see today as? How do you compare today's standard and what's going on in the argument today to what you saw?
Well, today things are much more polarized, more. There's less cooperation. There's less inclination to work together with people. We have a huge problem dealing with these separate issues.
Why do you think it's more polarized, though? Is it because of why? I mean, it seems like people are kind of pushing to the extremes. What is it that you feel is causing that? Is there anything in particular?
There are many factors. One of them is that there are many more people, and that creates problems of its own. In the time that I was privileged to work in Congress, we really understood that we had an obligation to work together. I feel that is no longer a real issue, and I'm sorry to see that.
Yeah, things have become very partisan, right?
Yes.
I feel like when you look at bills and legislation, I'm sure we all heard of the more recent. There was a infrastructure bill that I think just barely got passed right now, along party lines, but it's become simply if one side wants it, the other side doesn't, and there's no other rhyme or reason behind it besides that.
I think it's important to acknowledge also the role of social media in kind of the polarization that's happening. Because I think that people are able to kind of build their own echo chambers around themselves. And then they don't even know that there are people who have different opinions, and they don't know how to speak to them in a way that will influence them and help them understand the other person's perspective. So it's kind of everyone sort of turning inward to their own world and listening to their own story. And it's becoming harder for people to open up and listen to other people's stories.
Agreed. Daniela, in 2019, I had the blessing of being in Italy with my mother, and a gentleman came and asked us about like US politics. And I found myself participating exactly that way, which is not my nature. But I felt so aggravated. I felt heated to be asked as an American to articulate my opinion about, at the time, President Trump. And it felt visceral for me. And that was a moment where I realized, oh man, am I also living in the same echo chamber that you speak of? And it caused me to take a step back and ask, is this kind of the person that I want to be? Someone who isn't able to have conversation with other people. He was just asking questions. I don't think he meant anything by it. But my mother was very patient. I wasn't.
I think the free access to information we have also kind of influences it, because we know more than we ever did. We have more access to information, and we can kind of flood ourselves with it, which I think can lead us to get very emotional about things that otherwise we might not feel so connected to, or we would understand, okay, this is a little bit removed from me. Maybe I can listen a little bit more. So I think it really heightens the stakes, the emotional stakes.
You know, I think one of the things, going back to values that are taught and taught in school is critical thinking and the ability to have these conversations that I think the lack of is starting to become more and more apparent. I think, even if you surround yourself in a bubble, I read a study the other day that said that, and to bring up another polarizing issue with vaccinations, those who are against vaccinations or anti-vax, about 50% of them said that in this poll, nothing could convince them otherwise. And everybody can have their opinion, and I think I think it's fine to think a certain way. But what worries me about a lot of the conversations we're having is that people are not willing to compromise or are so close-minded that there is nothing you can say to convince them otherwise. I mean, you could tell me that, if you told me gravity didn't exist, I wouldn't believe you. But there are things that if I looked outside and I could test and see with my own eyes, that would convince me otherwise at some point. If I started floating up in the middle of the day and then I would say, you know what, gravity may not exist. So, I think that's the problem we have today is especially, and it stems from a younger age of just being more critical thinking skills, right? It's having the ability to have these conversations and to accept when you're wrong and to make adjustments to your own core belief system and to have these conversations and communicate with one another in a way that makes sense.
But I think in terms of what you're saying is those skills being taught. What we know for sure is that behavior is mostly caught. Unfortunately, many generations have not been practicing this critical thinking. So how do we expect to pass this on down the generations when we ourselves are not able to exercise that critical thinking? We are so closed-minded. We are so hanging on to what we've known and what has been and what has worked for us, and we're not able to open our mind up. But then we are expecting the other person, especially the younger generation, to pick up critical skills because we have taught them in school, oh, critical skills, this is what you do, this is what you do. Yet you're standing there, maybe as a teacher or as a parent, when they question you, you're not willing to budge. You see, when they say, I don't think, or when they say, I am binary, or when they say, I think I'm this sexuality, or when they say, I'm this race, we're not willing to budge. How can we teach? And we know that behavior is mainly caught. So I think for us who know, we need to actually have that open mind of saying, let me give this a chance. Always saying to myself, let me give this a chance. I mean, in my conversations with young people and parents, I want to let go of what, of course I have my own beliefs and I have my own values. But one thing I know is other people have their own beliefs and their own values, and they are as equally valid. Now, can we, or are we able to walk hand in hand without necessarily looking eye to eye? We might not agree on the vaccination, but are there other things that we can agree on? Because we are independent people, right? I can agree with you, Sharifah, on yes, we can do this show, but then also I can disagree with you that the sky is blue, but that doesn't mean we have to be enemies. But as you said, Kim, there's that polarizing. I believe this, therefore anyone else that believes this is my enemy, regardless of whether they are my brother, whether they have the same blood type, regardless whether they go to it's a very closed thinking, and we must be willing to relinquish that. And we can do that and model that to other people, because I believe we influence other people by the quality of our example.
Absolutely. I don't know if everyone else agrees, but it is time for a brief commercial break.
You need jordansrooter.com. Get free estimates, 24-hour service, special discounts for seniors and veterans. That's jordansrooter.com. Have a home repair or some remodeling you need done? No problem. We can handle all that too. Give us a call today at 800-300-0358. At Jordan's Rooter, we take pride in our work and always make sure to get the job done right the first time. That's jordansrooter.com. We want to be your Mr. Fix-It.
I've had this problem.
Big problem.
I really needed
A good business consultant.
And I kept searching and searching.
There are so many choices.
It's really hard to find one that has all the things on my list. But I finally did it.
Yes. Thank you.
If you are looking for one as well,
Look no further.
Here's a really good one.
Just use mine. Use mine.
I'm very satisfied.
Definitely recommend. Problem gone.
thank you.
If you are just now tuning in to the Roundtable Talk Show, we have been having an incredible conversation. I'm just blown away at our ability to have such sensitive topics discussed in an environment which usually gets very heated, but people are passionate, but we're respectful as well. So if you missed the first 30 minutes of the show, you definitely want to start the show from the beginning, because it is one for the record books. Mr. Robert, we're having this conversation, and one of the things that Eric mentioned is the whole critical race theory. And my question to you is, years later, do you believe, or are you surprised that we're still having this discussion?
I'm not surprised by anything, and whatever we do in life, I think we need to share it with others. And I just recently did a book that was about the civil rights fight in '64. In which I was a participant in. And what was important is the notion that we could all work together, that there was a bipartisan attitude that was impressive and important and necessary. And we all have to learn from each other. As I've learned from all of you on this panel today, it's fascinating to me to hear the diverse views and all the interesting experiences that you've all had.
Yes, absolutely. Miss Maya, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you that it's so important that we talk about love here, and like the reason that we're doing these things, it doesn't have to be visceral. The same way I was saying that I have experienced that too. We're human, and I surprised myself. But the critical thinking elements and the trying something different, I think require curiosity and the desire to want to be curious. And that's probably where I'm interested in, like, how do we disengage for long enough to explore curiosity? So again, in the US, we are taught, and the majority of our lives are about production and consumption. So where do we get time and space to explore curiosity, to have breath, right? To engage in some of the more important conversations that we have to achieve.
Eric, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all great topics. Just to play devil's advocate, I think the difficulties comes when these topics have such a big impact on people and the people around us. I think it's easy to want these things, but when policies and things start affecting people disproportionately, and when we see things like, going back to even this COVID pandemic, which is on everybody's mind, and how it's affecting those around us. I think everybody now knows somebody who's been, personally affected by this pandemic. How do we settle that personal connection with open-mindedness, and how do we correlate the two? It's difficult to do. I think it's much easier said than done. And that's the difficulty I think we're seeing in a lot of issues. So it's, I think it's good. We should always want to reach across the aisle and have those conversations. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to do, and that's the lack of solution I think that we're seeing. Yeah.
Eric, I just want to say something that I think with information, I know what you're talking about, policies and maybe the pandemic. One of the things that I began to see as parents began to understand, you're not trying to tell them to be vaccinated or not vaccinated, but I began to show them that what's happening in the world, right? This is what we call advanced childhood experiences. But if you've done any sort of medicine or psychology, what we know is when young people have been affected by what we call advanced childhood experience, which, for example, the pandemic is, because if you think about the pandemic, how it rocked, especially our kids, and the increase in mental health problems, right? When you begin to educate them in that deeper level on things that matter, you're saying to them, when you make these choices, this is what's happening. What don't you think we should focus on helping our young people process what has happened, and also show them, not tell them, show them that the steps we are taking are for us to help you alleviate some of the experiences that you're having. Then parents begin to make different choices. Most of the time, the reason people make these, what I call stuck choices, the reason people hold on to something is because, let's remember, nature abhors a vacuum, right? If I'm holding on to this, that means I can't go to the other one. And if I'm holding on to this, I can't receive anything else, right? So if you give them an option that seems higher, that is more loving, I think, as you said, when you operate from a point of love, you give them an option that is acceptable to them, then they are more likely to take it because it resonates from a heart level. But when we just go, oh, it's vaccine or vaccine, if I've always been an anti-vaccine person, I have no reason, I have no visceral or emotional or biological reason to shift. But I need a more deeper reason to make that shift. And I think when we speak to people, we need to try and speak from a heart-to-heart level.
I have a question for you about this. I've been watching my peers who have young children, and the anxiety that kids have been like, I can't wait to get my vaccine. And I find it striking. I don't know that I ever discussed, my children are adults now, but I don't know that I ever had an opportunity to discuss with them things that were pro-health, right? Like, how is that going to affect this generation, do you think?
Who's the question for?
Oh, sorry, Angela.
All right. One of the how it's going to affect them is they are able to be responsible for their own health. They are engaging in choices that affect health. Do you know one of the articles in the children's rights is the right to good health, right? So our kids, when they go to school, most parents don't even know these articles. They don't even know these rights. But our kids know this, and they know instinctively, because they have been taught that some of them have them on their boards all day, they know their rights, and they feel if this is my right, then I have a responsibility, I have a say in this particular, it's my health, I am responsible for me, right? And this is where things like self-regulation, making decision comes in. And we are doing this more now than I like you said, I can't remember. I was just taken. I never discussed any of my vaccination, any of anything. I was just taken. But obviously, since 1989, things have changed. And now we're in 2021. Kids know their rights. Unfortunately, some parents don't know. And that's why sometimes there's a lot of divide. And there's a lot of this saying, oh, kids of these days. It's not kids of these days. It's just that they are here. We are trying to parent them in 2021. With some of us who are parented in the 1970s, we're trying to use we're trying to use a fork to dig the land. Things have moved on. People are using machines to dig land,
Those are two different things, right? Like technological advances are different than the human brain's ability to catch up to that. So we know that the cerebrofrontal cortex of children, which makes like decision-making possible, sound decision-making, doesn't really fully form. So I'm very concerned with this idea that giving children the rights to self, to be accountable for themselves in spaces that they cannot really make those decisions is a healthy norm, because we have other tools to do that. Like tech and humans are not on the same level.
Right. I can see both ways. My children are 24 and 27. And in my generation, the whole idea was children are to be seen and not heard. And then what happened is, like, when my mother, she'll tell me, oh, you want to be your child's friend. And it's like, and my response is not that I want to necessarily, well, first of all, I want to be their best friend, somebody that they talk to all the time. And so I have always told my children, you can say whatever you want to say. You just cannot say it however you want to say it. You still must be respectful because I am your parent. But I believe that when you take away a child's opinion, and they've never had an opinion, they go out into life without being able to choose for themselves. So that's kind of my view and my thoughts on it. Does that kind of...
Oh yeah, I totally understand. I was raised in the same space, right, where I had the ability to be curious and to employ curiosity. There's a difference though, in like when we're asking children to be accountable for themselves, and do they have the capacity to really do that? So a 20-year-old making that decision is radically different than a 13-year-old making that decision.
Right? I totally agree with you what you're saying, Maya, about the definitely the frontal cortex of especially our teenagers. It's not done at all. It's still developing in neuroscience. We know this process is going on until they're about 25. So and what's influencing them mostly is the limbic brain. However, Maya, there's something you mentioned about love, about the spirit, about intuition. And each one of us, that thing that beats your heart.
Yeah.
It beats the heart of your child. It flows 50 gallons of water of blood in your child. It makes your child sleep, and it makes your child wake up. We must never underestimate that power in these kids. Of course, we have to guide them, but intuition is very, very strong. And as you talk about decisions, there's those things of them knowing each human being has that self-preservation. We all have that wanting to live, and we have that knowing. It's a wisdom of what is good for me. And that's why a kid will not knowingly eat poison. No one will knowingly eat poison. And the reason we actually maybe self-harm or we do things that are detrimental to ourselves is because we don't know. But a child like that, which we call the Gillick competency, right? A child who is allowed to actually listen. When you say to them, listen and give me your authentic answer. But most of us were never given that opportunity to do that. So we don't know how to, I heard Sharifah say that you say your children are your best friend. And this is something I encourage parents to do. Because when you make them your best friend, they can trust you. They can be honest with you. But most parents will say, oh, I'm your parent. I'm not here to be your parent. I'm not here to be your best friend. I'm here to be your parent. But how that will not work now, not in 2021. If we want our young people to trust us, we need to position. And sorry, I'm going to talk just one thing about from my religious background. I know all of you are open, and when I give this example and parents tell me, oh, I'm not here to be your friend, I talk about God, and I say God is all powerful. By the way, I'm talking, if you want me to talk about science in the same spectrum, I can talk about it, but I'll talk about God in this specific thing. God is all powerful, yet God calls us our friend. God calls us our guide. God calls us our shepherd. Calls himself all these names. All these names. Why is it as we as parents or we as teachers who cannot be that to our kids?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Daniela, I'd love to hear from you.
So much has been said. I don't know how much I can, a lot of you are in education. I come to this as a parent. I have 4 children, ages 12, 11, 9, and 1 year. And it's been quite a journey through COVID with them. I think that the issue with vaccines and their excitement about getting the vaccine is very closely related to our own excitement about getting the vaccine. They saw that this is the thing that we were waiting for, just the end of this. It seemed like that was the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that they see it that way too. So I think that that's, something to take into account. I don't see parents giving their children the choice, like you can make the decision whether you want the vaccine or not. And I think that what you've all spoken about the prefrontal cortex, and it's important to acknowledge those things. And I like what you said, Angela, about I think it's important to train our children to think independently for themselves with guidance.
Yes, very interesting. Robert, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
How much time do I have? Look, I think we all need to share our experiences with one another. And like I say, I had the privilege of doing this work when I was very young, and I have written a book about it called Crisis and Compromise. And it's very important that we learn to compromise, because life is nothing else but compromise between life and death. We have to understand that, go forward together. And I'm delighted to listen to everybody's thoughts on this, and all of you are really brilliant. So thank you so much.
Eric, what are you thinking?
Oh boy, yeah. A lot to be said. I think there are points on both sides of the spectrum. I think it's, especially with kids, there's so much we want to teach them. I have 2 children of my own, and one of them is 3, and we're going through this. I think what you actually mentioned, Sharifah, struck a chord with me, which is listening to them, but also it's how you say it, right? So I'm struggling with this too, how to be a good parent, and does that mean being their best friend, but does that mean also being the parent, setting strict guidelines and what's okay and what's not okay? And I think every parent here knows that the lines get blurred very, very quickly. In a lot of situations, it's not always clear what the right answer is. It's, as it turns out, I think one of the tools we have to teach our children these skills is education, right? It all goes back to not just what we're teaching them, but being able to think outside of that and being open to different cultures and to being open to different types of people. And there's no other environment besides school. Well, I mean, there are other options, but school is the most pervasive and ubiquitous option at our disposal to help um, shift opinions, to open up minds, and to make change and progress at a level that will actually impact generations for in the future. So that's what I'm passionate about is just getting the opportunity to work with youth and to be a part of that process. And it seems like everybody here in their own ways is trying to impact that change as well. Whether you're an author or working with youth or working on a more fundamental communication. And yeah, it's just been exciting to be a part of this conversation.
Yes. Well, Eric, believe me, it's not easy. Somehow, somewhere along the way, you're going to make some mistake, but all children need is love because they're the most resilient beings on this earth. But it reminds me of a conversation I had with my son once. And I told him, and we were deciding on lunch. And I said, what do you want for lunch, son? I said, you're a king. You have the power. And he goes, I want Subway. And I said, I don't want Subway. He was like, what happened to I'm the king and I have the power? And I said, yeah, but I have veto power. Okay. So sometimes you got to pull rank on these kids. Right. But it's been an interesting conversation. We are coming down to the last few minutes of the show. And what I love to do at the end of every show is just simply allow my guests the opportunity to speak directly to the audience, to everyone who is watching this show live, as well as everyone who is watching it in the archives, and let them know what you want them to take away from your appearance here today. And we're going to start with you, Daniela.
I actually wanted to tie into what Eric said about the power of education to help people learn to open their minds and see other perspectives. And I think that fiction is also a very important way to help people understand other experiences. So this is my book. It's available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And if there's anything that I hope that someone gets out of reading it is it would be the importance of listening to other people's stories, the importance of seeing opposing views and just sort of sitting with them, not feeling like you need to change somebody's mind, but understanding where people are coming from, even if you completely disagree with them. I think Angela talked earlier about needing to understand that somebody else is also a person, even if he disagrees with me. I think it's also important to understand that not only is he a person, the reason that he has that opinion, like he's not just stupid or everyone comes to their own opinion from their own background, from their personality. And I think it's important to acknowledge that in other people. So I hope that my book can help that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Robert, what do you have for the people?
What I have is to share my own experiences, as you all have done. And that's what's so interesting, is to have such diverse and interesting points of view. As I said, I felt compelled to write about my experience. And so I did this book, which is called Crisis and Compromise. And if you're interested in it, because it tells you what is basically the important in the human nature is that we need to work together. We can't separate and be so at odds with one another. And so I hope that all of us learn that from each other. But it's been really fascinating, and I thank you all for being here and being part of it. I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Robert. We appreciate you. Angela.
I am just so thankful to be in the midst of you powerful guys, Daniela, Robert, Maya, Eric, and Sharifah. You guys, to be honest, you've expanded my mind just a little bit again. And this is what these conversations do. And just to finish this, I don't know how much, I don't have much to say, but the last thing I want to say, and I would like you, especially if you're in any position of influence, and believe me, all you grown-ups, are in one way or another in a position of an influence. Never say, I'm just a parent. Never say, I'm just a sweeper. Never say, I'm just a janitor. Never say, I'm just an author. You're not just. You are an influencer. And the 3M framework I like to give everyone is to think of yourself if you want to influence anyone. Remember, I said we influence others by the quality of our example, not how loud we speak, trying to convince them from our point of view, but our example. So think about modeling. How am I modeling my values? And then think about how am I mentoring the people around me. Mentoring is when you share your experiences, examples, your stories that have influenced you, and then they influence other people. And then after you've been a model and you're a mentor, then you can be a motivator. This is where you now are in a position to actually say people, you can rise to this position. You can rise to this position. And they now can believe you. Why? Because you're living it, you're modeling it. And because you're a mentor, you probably have experienced what you're asking them to go through. And now you're a motivator. So think about those 3 M's, because each one of you have a space of influence. Every one of you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Eric, what do you have for us?
Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was interesting conversations. I know we talked about a lot of sensitive topics, and but I think it was a great conversation to have and get a lot of different points of view. Tying that back in, if as an educator, an owner of a company that works with K through 12, one of the things we are very passionate about is helping children with their academics and just giving them the space and the foundation to succeed later in life. Especially given the pandemic and its effects over the last few years, we found that a lot of families have been needing help catching up or filling in the gaps, especially with remote learning and a lot of things that happened over the last 2 years. So I just want to throw that out there, and if anybody ever needs any help or anything, companies like mine are out there to help you.
That's great.
Thank you, Eric. Miss Maya.
I'm honored to meet all of you all. You're officially my crew. When I was growing up, I had, and I continue to have, a wild imagination, and I was really encouraged to explore my curiosity. And the world that I envisioned actually looks like this group of people today. And so I think, Sharifah, big manifestations and love to you for bringing this together. In the 21st century, we have so many things that are hurling at us. And I think, to Angela's point, it really is about understanding and moving between these worlds of this tangible space, but also the spirit world. And those of us who can get that right through collaboration, using technological tools, education, leveraging our strengths to be more human, are the ones who win. And so I'm excited. I think that we have a neat opportunity to reset what our standards are as humans. And my assumption is that if you're here, you're intended to be here. You got what you needed to have. And we should really do better investigation into that to identify what our standards are and build a future that's as remarkable as we are, and reflective equitably, not just on one perspective of what's valuable or what should be valued. So I want to encourage you all, follow us and join us in this journey at FordMomentum.com. And if we see you in the street, if I see you, just know that I'm your friend, and that we're doing it with love. And I'm proud of all of you.
Oh, thank you. I love that. I never had a guest say, if I see you on the street. That is so amazing. This has been an excellent show. I want to thank you all for being guests on today's episode of the Roundtable Talk Show. And I especially want to thank everyone who tuned in to watch this show live, as well as everyone who is watching it in the archives. We definitely appreciate your support. I appreciate you watching the show. I appreciate you sharing the show. But then I always ask that you support our guests. Go ahead and pick up a copy of their books. Follow them on social media. idea, take your kid for tutoring. Make this world a better place. Their website links are in the description box. Their social media links are on their websites. Send them a message, reach out to them. And when you do, please let them know Sharifah Hardie says hi. Now, if you're interested in more ways that I can help your business, or maybe you want to be a guest on the Roundtable Talk Show, please visit my website at AskSharifah.com. Until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Pacific, everyone have a safe and a blessed day. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.